everybody. I'm making this recording today to try to get everybody caught up with Chapter 6. As some of you are aware of the fact that in class, as we've been trying to work through 6, I've been running into issues myself, and I think part of it has been basically because we were starting our work, walking away, coming back to it, and, time lapses, and you can kind of forget where you're at, and you're working with a lot of variables that you're setting at the command line that then disappear in the aftermath. So my attempt here is to actually go through Chapter 6 from beginning to end real quickly and get all the commands to work, and then have a solid Chapter 6 that we can all use as a starting point to continue our subsequent work in Chapters 7, 8, and beyond. All right, so what I did to start things out, and I did that before I started the recording, is I went back and I found my Chapter 5, which was completed. I made a copy of it into a new folder called Blog 3A. No real explanation for the name on that, except I was trying multiple versions here to see if I could kind of update old versions, and I just resolved to the fact that I needed to work with the ones that were created in this version of Ruby and Rails to make sure that everything worked correctly. Okay, so with that aside, I'm going to drop over to the prompt really quick. So let's launch one. And I'm going to get myself down to the root and then into the projects blog 3A folder. And then just to make sure that this is a version that's up to date, I'm going to run the command bundle install. And now keep in mind what bundle install does is it goes through and it checks all the dependencies within the project, all the little plugins and add-ons, to making sure that everything is up to date. And if it's not, then it will try to download and install those components and find any dependencies which are broken or needing a fix. So by running that command now, you do see that there were no errors. Everything has a using in front of it, meaning that all the components are already installed in the project. So I should be just fine. All right, so I'm going to dig into Chapter 6 and start to go through it kind of quick. I'm not going to be lecturing on this. This is really more, the attempt here is to get everything up to snuff and get Chapter 6 done so we can move on from it. So here's what I'm doing. I'm actually going to be checking the files now. So the first step is to take a look at this file. And this one is an app models article. So we're just going to go in there and check that one and see if we have these items inside. So you can see that we do have some of that in here, but some of it we do not. So I'm going to be adding this little tidbit here. And yes, you can copy paste right from the PDF. That's always my favorite way to do it. You do then have to go through and get the indents right, because Ruby prefers those proper indents. Remember, 2 spaces for each indent. All right, go ahead and save your work. In addition, we're going to drop down to the prompt. And what I think I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to open up a second prompt. This isn't a bad idea when you're doing multiple different types of actions. So once again, drop to the root and then change into the projects blog 3A folder, and then we're going to run the Rails console from here. So this will bring up our interactive Ruby prompt so that we can continue our work, and then I'm going to try to get some of these windows out of the way so we can start typing some commands. So let's get this just squeezed over to the side here, and there's our prompt. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to run this first command, and if you remember, we were basically trying a bunch of different ways where you can create content within the database and the application. So we're going to do title, we're throwing a published at. And I was running into this issue last time with my prompt, and you can see that it's broken. And what I'm basically trying to invoke a syntax error here because the stuff that I was typing was kind of scrolling off screen. And I'm not sure if this is a setting with my command prompt, so I'm actually going to come in to the properties for the prompt, and I'm going to look at the option areas here, and notice how they have this like buffer size thing, and I have my buffer set pretty large already. And I'm thinking that I might up that a couple of notches, and maybe that will take care of that problem. If not, we just have to kind of contend with it. So I'm going to go ahead and do a copy here, and because this is a split line thing, I am going to create a new document in my text editor, paste it, and I'm hoping some of this is kind of becoming routine for you guys at this point. But basically we're trying to get it all onto one line, otherwise the command prompt doesn't really care for it too much. Alright, so that's all on one line, and let's go ahead and paste that in, and press enter, and that worked just fine. And then we're going to run this next command, which is article last long title, and that should spit back the article that we just created, which indeed it did. Okay, on to the next page. Remember, we went through this whole rigmarole here of association, and I'm not here to talk about that right now. Remember, no lecture right now. But we are just moving forward to get to the command. So the next important command here is to generate a model for user. So we got that all copied in. Come back to the prompt, paste it. Alright, and it doesn't like something there. Alright, and I'm trying to figure out what actually failed here. And this might be part of the reason why we were having issues farther on down the line. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to type the command in manually. Oh, and I can tell you what's going on here. Alrighty. So this command, and I'm noticing we have a $sign here. This command is a regular prompt command. So trying to type it at this prompt is only going to generate problems. So I'm just going to type a little end command, and I'm going to let it throw the error. So I'm going to bring my other prompt back up onto the screen, and here's where I'll type the next command. And hopefully it's still in the buffer here, so I can just paste it in. And we'll let the engine do its work. Meanwhile, we're going to be navigating to the migrations folder. So that's in the database folder under migrations. It'll be time-stamped, and then that is created by this generate model command. So let's go into a file folder, up to the database folder, migrations, and then here we have the create users, as you can see, Ruby file. Let's go ahead and open that up with Notepad++ or whatever text editor you're using. And we're just really taking a look at this point of what's inside. So just verifying that everything is in place and everything looks just fine. Okay, let's move along to the next command. This is a multi-line command, so we're going to buffer it in Notepad++ here. Move it all onto one line, highlight it all, and copy it down to the prompt. That succeeded just fine. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to run a database migration. Remember, the database migration, basically what that does is it takes these commands that were generated by the generate model command and actually actuates them in the database. So the previous ones run the commands to create the database entries, and this actually moves everything into the database and propagates. All right, and that was successful. So we're on now to these next couple of files. So we're going to be in apps models user. So that's going to be up a level there, apps models user. Let's open that up. And then here's where we're going to add the relationship information that we talked about previously. So this is just basically creating a one-to-many. Actually, this is a one-to-one relationship. It has one profile. Every user has one profile. Think of it that way. It makes a whole lot of sense. Then we're going to bring up the profile file as well. And this one, 2 spaces, belongs to user. So, and that makes sense too. Every profile will have a user associated with it. So we made those 2 changes. All right, and then we're going to go to our Ruby prompt, which I left open, and I am going to type the reload command. And if you were watching the previous videos, this is basically where we were getting stuck, because the variables that we were creating in memory and the things that we were doing in memory, and we closed windows and opened windows, and it really kind of messed things up. So this is really an attempt to kind of ameliorate those problems. So we're typing the next command, which is user.create. Password. Close our parentheses and press enter. And we committed that to the database now. Now we're going to do the same thing with profile. I'm going to give this one a try with the copy paste. We weren't all too successful with that last time, but doesn't mean I'm not going to try again. Right, and this one is failing once again, and I'm not really sure why that is. So the best I can figure is that one of the variables isn't setting correctly. Right, and let's see if we can figure out why that's happening. Maybe just simply typing it will help. So let's just try that. Profile equals profile with a capital P. Create, and in this case we're doing name. And I'm going to truncate. I'm just going to say John D. And this person has a bio. Abbreviate just to get this over with quickly, and it's still not working. So I need to figure out why that is the case. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do the reload command again and see if maybe now I can retype that command. So I'm going to try it. It's still not sticking, and I'm not really quite sure why. So my default action here is always to go check the database. So let's bring up the SQLite browser. And then let's open the database in that project folder. Browse the data, and let's just see if we even have a profiles table. And we do, and I do see a name, I do see a bio, I see the information is in there. It's just for some reason just not communicating. So I think that what we're going to do here is we're going to try a little bit more of a primitive approach. I'm just going to manually create the record, and I'm going to put in the name. Just to get that in there. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to basically try the same action here. So I'm not going to be creating the profile, but I'm going to be loading the first profile into memory. So I'm going to say profile equals profile with a capital P first, and then you can see that it's trying to pull it in, but it's not quite working. So I'm wondering what exactly is going on here. So I'm going to pause for a moment and try to figure this out, and then I'll come right back. All right. I had a little bit of a suspicion here, and I think one of the things that is easy to overlook in the book is when you're doing this stuff, that some stuff is supposed to come back nil. And the reason for this is it does not have that connection between those two tables yet. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come back in here, and I'm actually going to put a user ID in here, but I do, of course, need to check the users table and see that the first person, who's user.example.com, right, his ID is 1. So I'm going to try to make that connection with that. So I'm going to come back to the profiles table, and I'm going to put in user ID 1. And of course, what didn't I do before? I didn't write the changes. That no wonder the command prompt didn't work. All right, let's try that command at the command prompt again. So let me do the profile app first, and this time it actually did come back. So we are seeing not only that, but we do have the user ID 1 in there, which is not something we wanted to do at this point, but at least it put it in there. Now, the next command, where they say user.profile, it should normally come back with nil here because they're assuming that we hadn't set this little piece, but since we've done it, it will actually show the connection. And that's really kind of what the next few steps in the book are. So knowing that situation, that connection is formed here. So we kind of did that manually, so we're able to kind of switch over that. Now we're going to move on to this next command, which is to create a new user profile. So we're going to try this one. I'm just going to copy paste it. We are at the interactive Ruby prompt. We'll enter that in. And once again, we're getting a little bit of resistance from the system here. Let's see. Failed to remove the existing associated profile. The record failed to save after its foreign key was set to nil. Right, so it doesn't like the fact that we have those associations formed, and now it really kind of has me looking back here going, well, since we have belongs to user, anytime we do anything in that profile table, it's going to want to make sure that we have that ID in there. And you can see that we're not enforcing an ID here. So really the thing to for us to do is to go back to the database and kind of look at what we could do to enforce that connection. And really what we would have to do is we would have to first actually create that user, and then we would also have to create that ID. So there seems to me like some of the instructions in the book here are a little bit off, given the fact that things have changed between the two versions. And you notice that when we do the create profile, here the user ID is seemingly auto incrementing. And the reason that's happening is because we're loading up the profile, and really what they're trying to tell us to do here is kind of update the one that's already there. So let's not worry about that step at this point, because we can create multiple users later on. All right, and then we're going to go back to our regular prompt. Now we're going to run this next command. Okay. And we are going to delete all the stuff from this prompt here. Okay, and that's okay that we got an error there, but we're just going to jump back over now to the regular prompt, and we're going to run our new generate command. And let that one do its work. Very good. Then we're going to go to the db migrate add user to ID articles RB file. So database migrate. And let's expand that a little bit so we can see it. And I think mostly here we're just double checking everything. Alright, and that seems okay to me. Alright, so that's all saved and set to go. We're just verifying that it did the work. And now at the regular prompt, regular C prompt, we are going to do the break db migrate. Once again, to kind of put all that stuff into the database that we just created. That should succeed. Alright, now we're going to move along. Back to the app models article RB. And that should be open, and I'm just double checking blog 3a apps model article RB. And we have our validations already in place, and the thing that we are going to enforce now is the belongs _to a user. Alright, the other stuff looks like it's just fine. Let's go ahead and save that. Next thing that we're going to take a look at is app models user RB, which should also be open. I'm always verifying my path up here. And we have one profile, but one user could have many articles. And let's save that. Alright, back to the Ruby prompt, where we will do a reload, exclamation, and then we're just going to do a really quick little variable setting here. So user will equal user.first. Very good. And then we're going to do a little attribution here. So we're going to say user.articles. So that's going to be attributed to the user that we just grabbed, which is the first user in the database. And the two arrows pointing towards it, capital A article, first article, will now be attributed to that particular user. Now, I'm noticing what the mistake is. Did you guys spot it? A little misspelling gets you every time. I got a couple letters out of place there. So let's try running that command again. Very good. So now what it did is it took the first article that we have and it's attributing it to that first user. So that was this step here. And then, you know, they have a couple of subsequent commands where they're just checking stuff. So if you want to type those in, that's fine, just to make sure that it worked. So first dot user _ ID. There you go. You can see it came back with 1, and then same approach, the first user, and then it just pulls back stuff from the user table. So all of that's working good, and they show you a bunch of alternate commands here as well. All right. Next thing, let's take a look at the command that says user.articles. Of course, we're not really going to come back with a lot, but if the person had 20 articles, all of them would spit back here if you did that. If we do articles _IDs, guess what that does? Well, it should pull back the article IDs, but apparently in this case you also have to type it correctly, so it's article IDs. All right, and it pulls back those. You can also check the account. We only have one, and if you want to like flip it, which is always interesting with this language. You can actually do that, and it still will show you that we have 2 articles total, but not all of them are attributed. All right, so moving on. We are now going to add some sorting to this. So we are going to go back to the user file. So bring up your text editor, find the user file, then after articles add a comma, and this is basically a little sort algorithm. So we are going to say order, and then we're choosing what field we're ordering by, so it's going to be published at, and then that stands for descending, if you guys remember your SQL commands. Even if you don't, I'm telling you. Then go ahead and save your work. So it's going to show whatever articles we have, and then it will order them by the published at date descending, meaning that the newest will show first. That's the point there. Next thing that we're going to do is add a secondary thing that we can publish by the date descending and then the title ascending. So we can add that little piece if you wish. And really that's not really obligatory, but something you can do if you wanted to add something to it. Just make sure that you get all these right, because I just added that without removing. So it should be published at descending comma title ascending, and closing paren at the end, and save. Alright. Now next little thing that you can add is this. So notice that we can throw in a dependency, and what that does is it just basically makes that little connection between these, so that if you were to go ahead and do a destroy command, it would also destroy the associated, like, so if you destroy the user, then it also destroys the dependent articles. Now that might be something like if you're really doing application design, you really want to think about that before you execute a command like this, because that might not be what you want. In this case, the author does want to do this, so we're going to throw it in, and then we're going to do a save. Okay. Another option would be to nullify. Now what that one basically does, and you might guess already, is that even if you get rid of the user, it just basically erases the user information rather than destroy the content as well. Alright, next thing that we're going to be doing is right back at the regular prompt, we're going to do some more generate commands. And at this point, the next command is to generate a model for category. So let's do that. Let's paste that in. And if you think about how blogs work, sometimes you have articles and whatever that are fall into different categories. So we created that one. We're also then going to do something fresh here, because we are going to generate the migration file. So we generated the category, and then we are going to generate a migration create articles categories. So let's run that one. Next step is to go find the migration file. So we're kind of getting in this groove here. And here's the file that we just created. And let's open that up and take a look, and then make a couple of adjustments. So we do have the change, and we have create table articles categories. But notice the stuff that's added here. So we need to add this little part here, the ID false part, with the comma. Put that in, and we'll create a little space inside here. And we don't want a tab, we want a space twice. these references inside. This one will have to be spaced over. Then additionally, we're going to add another method here. Add our indents and save. Next step is back over to the prompt and run a migration. So all this stuff gets saved into the database. And then because we just made changes to that clash file, that will also get propagated as well. All right, next thing we want to look at is the app models article RV file. So I'm moving along at a pretty good speed here, and hopefully we can get done before class starts tonight. That is my goal. All right, so we're taking a look at Notepad++, and we're looking at app models articles, and that is right here. All right, so we have the belongs to user, and now we're going to be adding has and belongs to many categories. So that is basically a many-to-many relationship that we're establishing here. So save that. All right, then we also have to add this declaration to the category RB file so that there's a link in both directions. That file is not open yet, and that is app models. So we go to app models category and add the line in there, a couple spaces, and save it. All right. Next little thing is kind of interesting. We're actually going to create a file that we're going to put in a database folder that's a seeds file. And basically what that does, and if you're familiar with database work, is we are going to be creating content to inject into the database manually. So we'll first go to that folder. So let's go to that folder. So that's in the database folder again. And you see how we have a seeds file. Let's open that up. And you see that this is all blank in here, and then they give you examples. And if you want, you can delete the examples, or you can leave them there. There's no harm done either way. But we do need to take all this code here and inject it into the file. So let's do that. And then let's also get all the indents kind of matched up. And, you know, frankly, these are not very consequential, but I guess I just do it because I like it to look nice. The truth is, users never see your code anyhow, but you know, somebody that follows you in your footsteps might appreciate it. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, after you've done that, the way that you inject that stuff into the database is at the regular prompt, and instead of doing a rakedb migrate, we do a rakedb seed, which takes a seed file and then injects it in. So it's going to create a user, and then it's going to create these categories. And after we run this little seed operation, I'm going to actually jump over to the database and just show you that. Hopefully it works. You know, I always do that kind of pensively. Let's refresh that list here. And sometimes you have to kind of like jump between. So you can see those categories are listed here. But you guys notice what I did is I like switched tabs, and by switching tabs it forced it to refresh. And even though I hit the refresh button, it didn't really seem to work. But it indeed added those categories like we seeded, and if it worked correctly, it also added Mary as a user along with her password. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to run some more Ruby commands. So here we are doing an article equals article. See, I keep misspelling that for some reason. Article.last. That loads that up. And then we're going to run this command where it's going to look for that category. Indeed found it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use that like weird double bracket thing to associate that category with the categories that we're talking about. All right, so what are we misspelling here? So category equals category find by name programming, which it did find. And then we're saying article dot categories and pointing category over. And it's, for some reason, it's trying to read it as a method. Maybe if I type this in manually, it'll work. There's always that danger when you're copy pasting from a PDF if there's like junk stuff that follows, and apparently that's not the case here. Now, this stuff isn't very consequential if it works or not, frankly, because really the important stuff is that things get into the database. So really, I'm not too worried about any of these, because we're not really changing the database content or forging any associations or anything like that. But what it was intending to do was have that category ID 1 name program. So let's just go look and make sure that that stuff's in the database correctly. So going back to the categories table, is category 1 programming? It sure is. And then are we associating those two things together at this point? No, we're not, so not a big concern. All right. We're going to move on and generate another model. And you can see once you get moving on this stuff and you have like a design in place that you're working from, and a lot of that just basically takes planning, you can actually move pretty fast. So you'll find a lot of developers, when they're doing this kind of like creation of models and data and databases, even though Ruby makes it really easy to create all the database stuff, there's a lot of planning that happens on paper, and a lot of that is just simply working with diagrams, figuring out what data ties together. And if you ever learn a good database design, you'll know that that's a really common approach. All right, so I got that one in there. Once again, we're going to do a rake db migrate, get that to work. And that worked just fine. We're going to jump in and do some edits to these files here. So the first one is the comment RB file, so let's go find that one. I'm not sure that it's open yet. It's not. And that one's going to belong to article. And let's save it. And then we're going to find the article RB file, which really should be off to the left here somewhere. There it is. And here we are going to add another link here. So you see what we're doing is we're basically showing that this is creating links to many different components within the database. And that's very common for a database. So this is how we're forging those associations. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to add this line to our user RB file. And that's also open here. There it is. So we're going to add a line. So if you think about it, one user might have many replies through what? Through articles, source, comments. So once again, forging many different associations and stuff and getting them all to tie together. Now I've reached this point in my PDF and I see that I have a little comment. It says, don't forget to start the Rails console. All right, I'm not sure why that was in there, but apparently in the past we had forgotten to do that. So if you want to type some of these commands just to see if the associations are working, that's fine. Once again, I don't believe any of them are consequential in terms of the structure, but there it is loaded. And then if I type user dot replies dot empty, of course they should be empty. There are a bunch of things here that probably aren't getting loaded back in, and like I said, once again, these commands are not consequential. We are not using any of these to do anything in particular. However, notice on this one, we're doing article comments dot create name guest email guest. This one we probably actually want to do. So let me see if I can run some of these actually. In the worst case scenario is I would actually force it into the database, and I really don't want to do that. I would rather do it from the prompt. But we did the user.first part. Now we're going to apply article, which is this command here, equals user.articles.first. All right, and now we're going to run this next command. I'm going to take it over to Notepad++, copy, paste, and adjust to get it off of one line. See if I can get this to even highlight properly. Boy, it's being very resistant. Sometimes I love these PDFs and sometimes I don't. Hopefully that copies. All right. Once again, I'm getting an error here, and I'm not really liking it, but not much I can really do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into there and actually create this entry. So, and this is actually just kind of work around some of these problems. And once again, I don't think the stuff is updating correctly, so that's why I'm doing that. So there's our comments, and this is article comments create name is guest, their email is guest@example.com, and then they said, oh, great article, so let's write that in there. Great article. And I don't put the quotes in there, but we'll put in the exclamation. Oh, and of course I'm doing this all in the wrong spot, so I have to actually click new record first. So let me delete that stuff out of there. New record, and actually delete that record, and we'll do that work here. So user is guest at example.com, create article, and write the changes. And then of course what they're trying to do in the book is they're trying to like force these associations by, to the first article. So the article ID here is 8. I don't even know that we have 8 articles, but we can go look. I have articles with an ID of 2 and an ID of 9. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm just going to put in article 9 and then write the changes. Okay. Now the next section really isn't all that important either in terms of actually making our application work, but what they're using, or what they're showing us here, is that you can use finding techniques. So you can actually put in SQL sort of type of commands where it will look for things and then bring back results. And then the funny thing is you can actually put in straight SQL commands if you know them, and that's a way to do that. So all of these are just examples of doing finds, and once again Not a big deal. We're not changing any content. We're just looking for things and finding them. So that's why I'm like very quickly going through it. Just examples. Another interesting thing they show in this chapter is just basically the ability to chain commands together. So that's kind of helpful too. And then once again, they just do a bunch of examples of the same thing, and they set up a bunch of different categories and all that stuff. Now, in order for this stuff to work, we will have to do a couple of changes here to this file. So let's go to App Models Category RB. And I'm actually going to start to close some of these migration files, because migration files, especially after you've kind of worked with them, there's not really much reason to have to go back. All right, and then we're going to drop this in right here. Save it. And then, they're doing all these commands here, and all these commands do rely on the fact that you went through and worked on this stuff. So, I mean, we can type the command. It's not going to hurt anything. So we could let's do the reload, and then let's do category all, and then you can see that it pulled back all of them. Another thing that they talk about here is this concept of named scope, and this change is going to be made to the article file. Let's bring that one up. We'll bring up article. We have all of our associations and validations there, and then you can see that they're adding this additional section here, and you can think of this in a couple of different ways, but this basically sets up, the way I think of it is kind of like a default way to pull up certain information by using a keyword as opposed to putting in a whole SQL search like this. So looking for articles that are published where the published at thing is not null. So then we can actually just use this keyword published to basically check that with one word as opposed to using a complex series of SQL statements. So that's what that's all about. All right, so that change is made. We're going to do the same type of thing here and add one more line. Be careful with this one. This one is split over 2 lines. So let's use that buffer here in Notepad++. And actually that was really kind of silly because I'm not pasting it to the command line. I'm putting it right back into the editor, so that was actually very useless what I just did. But even teachers do that, I guess. So there it is. Save it. Then they add an additional line, and I wish, in a sense, they kind of like dumped it all in there, but really what they're doing is they're doing one at a time and then explaining what they're doing. So we have different scopes that we're setting up, so published, draft, recent, and then this one is where title. And notice with this one, what's kind of cool about it is we're actually, if you recognize this symbol from doing SQL, that's like a wildcard. So where it's like, and it'll give you the ability to actually type in a command where the title is, type in your keyword, and then it'll find it, so you don't have to type all that SQL-y kind of stuff. All right. If you want to test that, you can go ahead and run these commands, and they should work. I'm skipping over it for sake of efficiency. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to use some validations. And if you notice, there's a couple of things here that we're going to be working with. And we're going to be looking for this adjustment here, but this is actually an example. So what we're going to be doing is, instead of like validating that you have a title and a body, you're going to be actually looking for the fact that you have a login, that your password is confirmed, and that you accepted the terms of service. So these are things that we're going to add. So in order for that to happen, we're going to basically do a little bit of review here. We have to make sure that everything is in place. We have these in place. This part looks fine. We added all our scopes, and I think everything is okay. All right, I'm not really sure why the author went to that trouble. I guess maybe just to make sure, because at this point, if you don't have those things in place, stuff will break. I didn't see any differences here, but if you guys did, make sure you point it out to me. I'm sure you guys will. Then let's go to user. Let's check that one. All right, so we have one profile. Aha! So we do have to have this first line in here, which is validates uniqueness of email. So in other words, a user or a user's email has to be unique. Nobody else can have that particular one, and of course that makes sense, right? Let me give a little example there. We also have to make sure that the length of the email address is within a certain range. I normally wouldn't concern myself too much about this unless you've set up your database with some sort of limitation, but they want that to be basically between 5 and 50 characters. Pretty simple little change. And then we move on. Once again, now this next part, this is, if you guys remember from some of your other classes, this is what we call the regular expression. And regular expressions are kind of a language unto themselves, but this actually checks the format of the email to make sure that you have certain things present, like for example an @ sign, some characters, and then possibly some characters that follow that. I mean, think of the format of an email address. I'm not going to lecture on that right now, but if you wanted to, figure that out, do a little bit of research. Then additionally, they're going to add for a password. Of course, you want to make sure that they're signed in. All right, and then here we're going to go back to the article table now, and we want to make sure that we have everything in place. And we're going to add one little method at the bottom. And notice now we are actually using our scope. So see that word published, though we created that as a scope, and we have a question mark with it, so that means we're checking to see if it's published and then to see if it's present. So cool little technique. Notice I got my little comment there, reload. Yeah, so before you go to the prompt and start to run some of this stuff, you want to make sure. All right, next one is we're going to the comments. And inside a comment, we want to add this additional stuff, so let's get that in there. The author created some space, so why don't we also? And then this actually is all on one line, and my preference is to keep it on one line, so you can see how it is one line there. And I would encourage you to do the same. In addition, we're going to also do the validations here. And then they once again run through a series of commands, and of course I got the little reload in here because you want to clear out all the junk in memory, and then hopefully all the associations work. If you want, you can take the time to do these. I'm really desperately running out of time here, so I'm trying to focus on getting all the code typed in more than anything. But if you want to try it, I guess you could reload and then do article. and just kind of shows you how to do that. And then you can go ahead and start checking to see if those connections are made. And really that's what the author's doing here. He's like setting all these things where there's validations now where, you know, if you're going to like put in a comment, you have to be a user and you have to be logged in. And of course, if you're not, then it's not going to work. And these are actually some pretty sophisticated little actions that we're taking, so it's kind of interesting from that standpoint. Let's go back to the comment file and add the next little section. So we are going to put in another little method here called after create. Do our indents. Save it. All right, and then the next edit here is going to be once again in the same file. I believe apps models comment, and then this one is app models comment. Okay, and I'm trying to find the differences, the validation. So really what's happening here now is instead of running it as a full method, what's going to happen is we're actually going to throw in a keyword. So we're going to get rid of this. So what do you do after the article is created? Oops, I'm not pasting it back in. I'm actually going to come back over here and copy this line. So we're going to call upon that method, and it'll be defined below. And yes, you can do that. You can call upon a method internally, just like any other language, really. So what are you going to do after create? We are going to email the article's author. So after you create a comment, an email will be received by the author. So that's kind of cool. All right. So now we need to update the user model. And this actually can get a little tricky here. We need a regular prompt for this. So I'm going to go through, generate the migration. And notice what we're creating. Generate migration, rename password to hashed password. So in other words, when you work with passwords, you know, you noticed in our database they were in plain text. Not a good idea. What you want is a password that goes through some sort of an encryption algorithm and gets stored encrypted into your database. So that's what we're kind of enabling here. All right, so that was the first step. Now we're going to go to the migration folder and find the file that we just created with the migration. So that's going to come up to db migrate, and there it is. Real long file name, but very descriptive, you have to say. And we need to get this information in there. So let's add a couple spaces, paste it in, and save it. This one I'm going to go ahead and close. Back to the regular C prompt, and now we're going to do a rake db migrate to enforce that into the database. All right, that's good. All right. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the back to the user file, wherever that is, and I didn't mean to move the PDF out of the way. So here's our user. And one thing I want to show you here is something that might look a little PHP-like. So notice that we are going to require information from somewhere else. So we're going to require a digest. Okay, and that's kind of like an import statement in Java, or a require and include in PHP. It's really just pulling in external information. So here we are also putting in call for the password. And notice all these little validations that we did, and actually that space can stay. I'm trying to keep it consistent in look. So email within with, And then validates confirmation of password, so that's okay. Validate the length of the password, and if it's required, so we'll add that on the next line. Add a couple spaces. After this last section here, we are also going to do a before save encrypt the new password, and we'll talk about that in class, those of you that are there face to face. And then add these couple of methods here. And what these do is they help to do all the password mechanics. And you're going to see that there's a little command here, and it is a built-in one, for encrypting the password. And what happens is, Ruby, like many other languages, has libraries that it can pull in that allow it to do the encryption internally. Here you're also going to see something that looks a little fresh, and that is a protected section, and that should smack a little bit of Java or some other languages that you've seen. And this is basically the equivalent of like a private area in your code. So it's accessible only to the components within this particular class file. And then that's calling on other internal methods to the language, and the one that I'm indenting right now, which is the SHA-1. And this is really considered, at this point, maybe not professionally secure. Like if you were doing a real-world application, you probably would up this a little bit, because this is basically crackable. But this is the algorithm that's used to hash the password into something that is basically unreadable by the general public if they were able to, let's say, get into your database. All right, so that just goes through and explains all the stuff that's going on. And then they run a bunch of commands. Once again, I'm not worried about running these commands. My main concern right now is to make sure that we have all the information in the database to get work done. Now, we are going to add some stuff to the seed file here. So we did the user create, and then really what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through and I'm going to delete all this, and I'm just going to copy everything in. And I'm not really sure I'm going to be too persnickety about the indenting, but probably will. We got about 20 minutes before class starts here, if you guys are wondering. I'm trying to get this ready so that we can move on to the next chapter in class. Otherwise, it makes for a boring night. Save. All right. All right, so we have our seed file in place, and at some point, of course, and I don't see that I put a note in here, but in order for this seed file to take, we would actually have to do that rake db seed to make it all stick, and I'm tempted to do that right now. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at these two files before we do that. So I'm going to look at the article file, make sure that it looks like that. That looks fine. I'm going to look at my category file, make sure that one's okay. Aha, this one actually is missing a couple of things here, isn't it? All right, so category, default scope is fine. and then the okay, that's a different file. Comment file. Alright, so I'm just checking this again. Validates presence of. Yeah, and I will say that I'm a little concerned about this last one, but you know what? We're going to find out once we run the application. So I'm keeping a note to myself that this may or may not be good. So I'm going to cap the video here, and then I'll see you in Chapter 7. But what we have now in place should have things okay. What I will do, though, from the regular prompt before I go, and you should do the same, is let's do a rake db seed, pump that stuff into the database that we just put in the seed file. All right. All right, so I guess I'm going to have to research that too. All right, so that's it for this video, and we'll see you in the next one.